Excuse me. Good afternoon. Let me go ahead on and call the second meeting of the County Council budget meeting to order. Ms. Roberts, could you call for me for council members present?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Malinowski.
Present.
Dickerson. McBride.
Present.
Livingston.
Present.
Terratio.
Present.
Walker. Kennedy. Manning.
Here.
Jackson. Myers. Newton.
Present.
I'm here.
Dickerson.
I'm here.
Ms. Roberts, does that complete roll call? Does that complete the roll call?
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. And again, let me also welcome any of the guests that's online. I understand that the agencies were invited to answer questions, and should there be a question needs an answer from the agency. Now I'm going to turn it over administrator. Walk us through in terms of the process and the agenda. Mr. Brown?
Yes, sir. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Ms. Myers?
Yes, sir. I think I might have missed the roll call, but I want you to know I'm
Thank you.
here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair. The majority of this process will be conducted by our budget director, Director Hayes. He will walk us through the process consistent with our past years. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Mr. Hayes if you have no additional questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Let me make sure no colleagues have any particular question. You may go ahead, Mr. Hayes.
Well, good afternoon, Chair Livingston, Vice Chair Myers, members of council. Again, it's the second reading of the budget. We've had 2 work sessions, just a few housekeeping. Today, we'll be going over the millage agencies, grant recommendations, exclude county grants. There's one special revenue fund, transportation. Director Michael Neumeier will handle that.
Yeah, no, you got plenty of stuff.
Sorry about that. Somebody need to turn the mic volume off. Go ahead on Mr. Hayes. Sorry about that.
Okay, so one debt service, and we'll conclude with the CIP, and of course, council has to vote on the budget and millage ordinance themselves. We'll be using your original budget book that you had the past 2 sessions. Also, we sent some revised copies. I'll be very specific as we go through each line item as to what you were refers to. So we'll start off at the top of the motions list with the millage agencies, and you'll be looking at 124 in your revised pages, pages 124 in your revised pages with the millage agency. The millage agency did as council instructed, and you all received hard copies of their budget request last week. So those are the first motions on the table. I can answer any questions or whatever you look for.
You're asking now for any questions regarding the brief document or what, Mr. Hayes?
You all is typically, this is a motion list. You all would make a motion concerning the millage agency.
Yes, and now what we do is we just walk through each one of them. So
right. So we're starting with the first one. So the Recreation Commission is the first one, and they have a requested amount of $14,833,254.
So colleagues, the first item is that it's on the motion for us for consideration is millage agencies. And the first one listed as stated just now by Mr. Hayes. As we go through each of these, I'll entertain a motion on each one of them. That is where we are now in terms of the process. So Chair will entertain a motion regarding the first millage agency mentioned on that list, which was Recreation Commission.
Mr. Chair,
Ms. Rachel, you recognize.
thank you. Before we go down the list, I just have a quick question about the library. I know that we are, or I think that we are obligated to fund no less than a certain amount, which I believe is the budget from the year before, if I'm not mistaken. I want to make sure that the FY 2021 amended requested meets our legal obligation to fund the library.
Let me first of all ask staff or whomever whether or not that is a matter of fact. I know there's but
May I answer the question, Chair? And I don't know if legal is on the line, but when I spoke with the county auditor, besides the Recreation Commission, the only village agencies that had a minimum amount to fund would be the school district. He didn't mention the public library, sir.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, this is Jim Manning. Okay.
Mr. Manning, is that you?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Go ahead, please.
I move for second reading on the budget motion list for approval of item 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8.
You heard a motion for approval of the millage agencies and all 8 of them are down to the end, ending at District 2, correct, Mr. Manning? 8.
That's correct.
Is there a second to that motion? That motion dies for lack of a second, so we'll go back to item 1. Chair, entertain the motion for item 1, reference to Recreation Commission.
Mr. Chair, Bill Malinowski.
Mr. Malinowski, you recognize.
I have to shout out because when they put these charts up, I don't have the option of clicking on raise your hand, so I don't know where it went to. But what I would like to know is in the companion document, we've got question number 10 that Councilwoman McBride asked about when she said, and Budget Director Hayes just answered about other than the Recreation Commission required to fund them at a minimum amount. But she also said she would like to see the difference in the minimum amount required and the cap amount that we are funding. And I did not see that anywhere. And I'd also like to know what the difference is.
And Mr. Chair,
Let me get hold on 1 minute, Dixon. Let me see if Mr. Hayes could answer Mr. Malinowski's question real quick.
Mr. Malinowski, I'll actually have to get that aspect from the county auditor. I can have that before 3rd reading, sir.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Malinowski.
Mr. Chair.
Ms. Dixon, you may go ahead.
Okay, does this also give into consideration the 10% that we were asking for a reduction? Because I'm a little bit confused.
Well, if I remember right, that was something that was a letter was sent out to the various military agencies. Your question is, you mean the total amount that's here before us?
I want to know, did they consider the reduction of a 10% in their request for funding this year based on where we are? And I thought
we did receive.
I don't know whether I have all of that information in front of me.
Yeah, we did receive the new request from each agency in our packet.
Gary Livingston, may I answer the question?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yes, each millage agency, with the exception of Midlands Tech, did submit a requested document.
Mr. Chair, Does these figures reflect that? That's what Ms. Dickerson is asking, I think, or that's what I would
That's
like.
what I'm trying to figure out, Ms. McBride. Thank you.
Mr. Hayes, are these the original numbers or the numbers that were submitted after our last meeting?
They never submitted one.
Does these numbers reflect the 10% reduction we requested?
Yeah. Well, yeah, these, I can't say it's exactly 10%, but I do know each one of them submitted a lower request from what was originally submitted on May the 4th.
Thank you.
With the exception of Midlands Tech, correct, Mr. Hayes?
Yes, sir. They did not submit a new request, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
The
can I
item
be
before us
right
is item 1, the Restoration Commission. Ms. Newton, hands up, and then who else is trying to speak? We'll go next.
This is Delia Myers. I can wait till after Ms. Newton. Thank you.
Ms. Newton, then Ms. Smith.
Thank you,
Ms.
Mr. Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, fellow council members. I'm sorry to ask the same question. That's a version of what was asked, but I am looking in my original budget book on page 123. And then I'm looking at the new handout that we got on 120, that says page 124. And it appears to me that most of these numbers are the same as was in our original budget book. So am I reading that incorrectly?
No, ma'am.
No, ma'am, that's what I'm trying to.
Ms. Hayes, can you respond to that?
No. Each one of the agencies, right, in the original packet, there was, remember, the indices did not have a submission in the original packet. We submitted something in the companion document that showed what the original amounts were. But each one of the entities do have an amount that is, whose submission is lower than the previous one.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
I thought I had,
Ms. Myers.
I'll yield to Ms. McBride. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Ms. Myers, please.
I would like some clarity on the percentage reduction if it is not 10%. I know we keep asking this, but I'd like to know where we are, given that that was such a clear request.
You want to know the difference in the percentages. Was it 10% or was it not 10%? You know, for each person, was it 10% or not?
Okay, right. Well, let me just, I can give them each one of them the first. Mr. Chair?
yes, Mr. Hayes, you recognize.
I'll go ahead and read to you what the original submission was for each group. Is that okay?
Yes.
So for the Recreation Commission, their original request was $16,482,237. Now they're requesting $14,833,254. So the first one was $16,482,237. Now they're requesting $14,833,254.
So in that case, it's greater than 10%, sir?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
We can go through all of them, or either we can take them as we come to them. And why don't we do it as we come to them so we won't lose the numbers? So what's before us now, and you have the numbers on the Recreation Commission. The chair would entertain a motion regarding the Recreation Commission based on the numbers you have. Is there a motion regarding the Recreation Commission?
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Jackson, you recognize.
thank you. Based upon the information we've been shared, and it seems to be at least 10% or greater that the Recreation Commission has requested, I move approval for second reading of the Recreation Commission's request.
I second the
You
motion.
heard the motion. There's a movement properly second regarding the Recreation Commission request based on the new number we received from Mr. Hayes. Any discussion reference to the motion regarding the Recreation Commission? Mr. Jackson, you still need to.
No, sir, I'm lowering my hand now.
Thank you. Ms. Newton, you recognize, and Ms. McBride, you recognize after Ms. Newton.
Technically, I think Ms. McBride spoke first, and I'm happy to yield.
Go ahead, Mr. You may address my concern.
So I don't think so. So Mr. Hayes, looking at my original budget document, page 123, compared with this document 124, I think I see what my previous issue was. So in our previous budget book, the only place where we had numbers were in the column that was FY 2021, no millage increase. And then I think you verbally told us what the requests were, so they weren't recorded in print in our budget book. And so to me, that's seeming like the difference here, whereas in this new document on page 124, we have actual numbers that have been provided in the FY21 amended requested. Is that correct?
You are perfectly correct, ma'am.
Okay, and so then looking at this document, and so I already know we're talking about the Recreation Commission, the two numbers that we did not have at our previous meeting were Richland School District 1 and Richland School District 2, and those have now been provided on page 124 of the updated document that we have. Is that correct?
You're absolutely correct, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're quite welcome. Ms. McBride?
Yes, Mr. Chair, just following up on my previous question and Mr. Malinowski's clarification on the minimum amount of millage that would be required so that we could have that for the Richland County Recreation Commission. We would have that by third reading, before third reading.
Yeah.
You understand what we need from Mr.
Yes, I'll be trying to get the county auditor to provide that.
Thank you. Discussion reference, the motion for item 1, Recreation Commission is moving properly second. If there's no further Ms. Roberts, call the roll for the motion.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, my mute wasn't off.
I apologize. Go ahead.
So when we are looking at all of these agencies, not just Parks and Rec, are we looking at them with the caveat that when we get the new information that our budgets office will provide, we may actually have to come back and adjust the budget through an amendment, given what the reality of the numbers is?
I don't remember the details of that. Mr. Hayes, discussion surrounding that?
I want to make sure I'm clarifying. So is she saying that because of the ongoing pandemic, it'll be possible that even the numbers that the council will vote on will have to be amended at a later date?
Yes.
Yes, because we're awaiting final budgetary projections from you all, and we know that we're shooting in the dark. And these numbers, while seemingly aggressive, may ultimately be problematic. So I just want to be clear as to what we're doing.
Well, yeah, and I answer that this way. Yeah, so the county auditor obviously has provided some projections, which again, you're right, currently they are projections. Those values with specifically as it relates to the Recreation Commission is coming in less than what he's currently projected. So it is possible that depending on how the numbers shake out, if you will, that council would have to amend budgets later.
Thank you, Mr. Hayes.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Jackson?
when we first began this process, I asked a question during our first budget workshop and put it in writing the next day that, responding to what Ms. Myers just raised, my similar concern was the unrealistic expectation on everyone's part of any numbers at this stage of the process, and thereby ask for a continuing resolution so that we would not have to approve any budgets, but continue with the existing budget until we got to that point. And I think I said in writing September, when we'd have a more official determination of what numbers meant something based upon collected revenue as opposed to projections. not sure what happened to that request, and maybe because I didn't put it in the form of a motion, it did not get carried. And if that's the case, that's all right. But I just want to go on record stating again that we are definitely going by the seat of our pants at this stage of the process. And if that's what's required by ordinance, we have to do it. But I want to just simply say, I would rather we considered a continuing resolution as I requested and making a formal budget request based upon realistic based upon realistic revenues collected versus projected in September. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Very welcome. Mr. Manning, you recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Along with what Councilman Jackson was just saying, and the public probably completely understands this, as do my colleagues, but I don't. I was thinking along the lines of what Councilman Jackson said, that we were shifting the second readings, third readings, public hearings all into September. So I've been a little confused about what parts of it we decided that we were taking up this evening that got left out of everything else that got pushed forward. So if somebody can explain to me why we basically bifurcated what we're doing on second reading tonight without the information related to revenue, but we pushed a whole major another part of the budget into September for that very same reason. That if somebody could explain that to me, that'd be helpful. Thank you.
I concur, Mr. Manning.
Let me ask Mr. Hayes to see what his interpretation was in terms of how he thought.
Mr. Chair, before you ask Mr. Hayes, may I ask a procedural question?
Yes.
Did Mr. Jackson make a motion? Because if he did, I'd like to second it.
No, I did not take it as a motion, but he certainly can make a motion if he wished to.
Did he intend it as one?
Well, I was trying to, kind of like Mr. Manning said, I was trying to get clarification. And if I got an answer that made sense, I was going to withdraw the original motion, which I made to approve the second reading. But I needed an answer to that question that I raised a moment ago. Based upon that, I'd be more than happy to make a motion, depending on the answer to the question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. McBride?
Yeah. Mr. Chair, I actually thought Mr. Jackson made that motion last time, but somewhere along it got lost in the discussion.
I thought so too.
Last week, at the last budget meeting.
There was a discussion about it, but I don't recall us taking any action on it though.
Okay, just one more question. This is for Mr. Hayes. We talked about each agency may have, and I call them carryover funds. Did we still look at that to see if they have funding available that they could spend that was not spent this year?
With Ms. McBride, in the companion document, we did supply the fund balances or reserves for each one of the millage agencies.
Mm-hmm.
They supply that, ma'am.
So how did that look in comparison? Because I remember the companion document. How does that look as we think about what Mr. Jackson is talking about? Do most of the agencies have fund balances?
Well, yeah, they do. To answer that question, it would have to be each individual agency who are on the line would have to answer, because I don't know the specifics of their fund balances. So they would have to tell you how many months of revenue they have available and things of that nature. Specific questions of each one's fund balance, I could not answer the specifics of it.
But I did see some, I looked at some fund balances or something that you gave me and they were up in the millions.
Yeah, yes, ma'am.
Is that not so? You didn't give us some information regarding their fund balances? Mr. Hayes?
Yeah, well, again, the only thing they provided the numbers. You can keep in mind, as I put on the note, some of the fund balances, they did not designate what was unreserved or reserved or things of that nature. So to answer the specific question, I would much rather each individual agency answer it, because I don't know the details of their specific fund balance.
I got you, the categories, okay. I'm with you.
Mr. Chair, may I follow up with Ms. McBride?
You after Mr. Manning, I have Mr. Manning.
Okay, all right. I don't know how to put my hand up on this thing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The public may be very clear on this, and my colleagues may be very clear on this, but I'm really quite confused. At one point, we moved a whole lot of the budget, second reading, third reading, public hearings into September. I was thinking all of this was moving into September because the movement of that into September had to do with the fact that we didn't have an idea at this point what revenues may be, and thus, but I don't understand why, in essence, we've bifurcated, and tonight that we're having this hearing second reading on part of that, and the other part got shifted. If I get an answer to that, that'd be very helpful to me. Thanks, sir.
Chair Livingston, can I answer that question?
Mr. Hayes, yes.
Yeah, in the very beginning, when we started, I mentioned there really only were 2 items that need to be taken up during the budget process, and that was millage agencies and 1-year grants. The millage agencies are not part of the biennium budget, so they had to have a budget in place by July 1. In speaking to the county attorney, he said that a continuing resolution would not work because the budget is set by ordinance. So if you were to specify they would continue at the last year's amount, it would have to be by ordinance and not a resolution, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Dickerson?
I guess really answered my question because I'm very confused right about now. The other thing I would like to say is that the transparency, we're always asked from the county to be transparent, to show where our funds are. And I think those other agencies should do the same. So that's all out. So if there's a large fund balance, and we need to know how they're categorized. So that would be my concern. Thank you.
I have a quick question, then I go to Ms. Newton and Manning. Mr. Hayes, I think the question was asked the last time, could counsel for the millage agencies, in other words, we could not do a continuing resolution like the state legislators would do and then vote on this later?
Yeah, again, according to the county attorney, and I'm not sure if legal is on the line, when I posed the question, the resolution itself would not work because but a budget is, excuse me, an ordinance about a law. So
that's what I thought, okay.
So in order for you all to continue, you all would have to pass an ordinance keeping the amounts at the current level as opposed to a new amount.
Okay.
And Mr. Chair, may I say?
That's what I remember. Ms. Dixon, then Ms. Newton.
Yeah, well, I'm just going to say, I thought I asked specifically that when we have these meetings, that our attorney be present because things come up, we need answers. And so Mr. Hayes is not our attorney, and I'd like to know where the attorney is so he can give us some clarification on these issues. Thank you very much.
Yeah, this is Brad.
I think someone's on the line. Ms. Dickerson from legal. Legal's on the line, Ms. Dickerson.
Yeah, this is Brad Farah. I'm here.
You have a question for legal, Ms. Dickerson?
Well, we had questions, and I just want to make sure that Mr. Hayes said he had to refer to legal. So I'd like to know what legal had on what Mr. Hayes just said.
Yes, Mr. Hayes is correct. Under 49130, there's certain things that have to have a public hearing before you adopt, and one of the first one listed is adopting annual operating and capital budgets, and that has to be done by ordinance. Under 49140, it talks about the fiscal and budget years, and so all that's a statutory process done through ordinance. So he's correct about that.
Ms. Newton?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is also for legal, I think. So I understand, and thank you, Mr. Hayes, and thank you, Mr. Farah, for explaining why we have to approve all of the millage agencies now. My question would be, we're in this environment of uncertainty, so we can approve these numbers today, and there's nothing that stops us from doing it. There's plenty that stops us from knowing what the ultimate revenue numbers are going to be. And so to the questions of previous questions of some of my colleagues, my question would be, let's say that we approve all these numbers exactly as presented on page 124 of our budget today, and then at whatever time we get information from the auditor, from finance, et cetera, that says we can't sustain these numbers. What is the mechanism at that point for addressing that issue then? Because I know, we've asked about fund balances. I absolutely want to see that. I know there's some organizations that are already planning on dipping into their fund balances, but we just don't know what the county situation is going to be. So should our financial situation change, what would we need to do, and what are we legally able to do if we needed to adjust these numbers? Thank you.
Yeah, this is Brad. I mean, legally, you can do budget amendments, and that, so if you have unforeseen things that come up, I can give you one example, very public example. We had a lawsuit that lasted for, I think, a decade in the Green Diamond situation, and if the county had lost that particular matter, you would have had to have made a budget amendment, or I don't know how we would have paid the damages in that case. Fortunately, we prevailed, but you can only look at what you have in front of you, and you've got a lot of unknowns. So if you have to make an amendment later, I mean, that would be the mechanism that I understand legally.
Just a question. Can we vote on the items as presented and specify a specific date when we would reconsider the numbers? So that way we'll know exactly where we're going and how we're going to get there. Mr. Hayes, Mr. and legal, would there be a problem with that being a part of a motion to say we would revisit these numbers on a specific date?
Yeah, I mean, my understanding is, this can't kind of be like an estimate. I mean, you've got to plug in a specific number for what you think at the time. Yeah, for what you think at the time you're adopting the budget to meet the obligations of the county. I mean, so it's kind of hard because, I mean, you got an obvious example this year with the uncertainty, but you could be rocking along having great times, and all of a sudden the market tank, and then now you've got something you hadn't planned for as well. So, I mean, all you can really do is look at the circumstances you have now and make whatever projection you need to make, but it needs to be a number that can realistically sustain, pay for the item in the budget. It needs to correspond in what you adopt.
And Mr. Hayes, according to the auditor, then, is your understanding that the budget will support the numbers that have been presented? Based on what he's saying about what the mills will bring in and so forth?
Again, not to speak for the county auditor, but remember, these are projections, and they're projections.
I know they're projections, though, and that's every
in the aspect of a pandemic. So these are his best guess numbers at the current time. This is what he's told me.
That is an important point, Mr. I have Manning, McBride, and Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So when are we scheduled for the public hearing and the third reading on everything we're doing tonight as second reading?
Say that, you saying what? I'm sorry, man, what'd you say again?
All right, we're doing second reading tonight. This is an ordinance, so it requires 3 readings and a public hearing. I'm asking, when is the third reading and public hearing scheduled?
Mr. Manning, we've had public.
You've had a public hearing.
You only do one public hearing. The next reading is the third reading of the budget. We don't have another public hearing until we have the general fund amendment, which is in September 3rd.
Okay, so when's third reading scheduled?
Third reading is scheduled next Thursday, June 11th, sir.
Well then, Mr. Chairman, I move that we adopt everything before us on second reading this evening. And if we have any more information, we deal with it next week. But at this point, if we're just going to take guesses on every line, and a week from now, we're going to have to take guesses on every line, we might as well just, if we technically have to approve second reading, I say we approve the whole thing. So my motion is to approve everything before us tonight on second reading.
Second.
It's removed and proper seconded to approve everything before us tonight on second reading. Further discussion, Mr. Jackson, you recognize?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not opposed to, for semantics sake, going through the process of approval with the clear understanding that at third reading, if we don't have a different approach to making this determination, that I will be adamantly opposed to continuing based upon the conversations we've been having and the issues that have been raised by me and several of my colleagues. And that is very specifically that we are making decisions based upon estimates, and in the best of times, those estimates have been pretty reliable. But during these times, we have no confidence in the same estimates that we were basing our decisions on a year or two ago. And so as a result of that, I was willing to, for example, approve the recommended budget for Recreation Commission because they clearly are significantly less in their request than they were the year before. That wasn't just to move it along. I recognize that. And so in other cases, I would not be in favor of that tonight, but in the interest of making that determination next week, I'm willing to support that. But I wanted to be real clear that those that have not met that threshold, I will not be in favor of supporting them next week, given what everyone has said tonight. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Manning. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair?
You recognize Ms. Dickerson?
I support Mr. Jackson's comments on this because that's where I am. And I want to commend the Parks and Recreation for coming in and clearly showing us that they have made a really effort to reduce the budget, and the rest of them I'm not sure of. So I can support the Park and Recreation, but I can tell you right now, until I see the figures on the other ones, I cannot support a motion to approve them all. Thank you.
I have Mr. Malinowski, Ms. McBride, and Ms. Newton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I also would support what Mr. Jackson and Ms. Dickerson have just said. I have run the numbers on the 10%. The only ones that have not come into compliance are the two Midlands Tech ones. And I'd like to thank all of the other agencies for following what they were requested to do. Thank you.
Ms. McBride and Ms. Newton. Ms. McBride, you recognize?
Okay, I'm sorry, I was talking to myself. I support I support what my colleagues have said in regards to those that attempted to do the 10% reduction. However, I am concerned, given the circumstances that we're in regarding fund balances, and that we are being, which we need to be ultimately conservative right now. And if there's funding that the agencies have that they can use, then I don't know why we're funding them at the level now. So I do have concerns regarding the overall fund balance and actually the overall budgets that they're presenting. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Ms. Newton and Mr. Malinowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So first, I want to clarify, if I can, Mr. Manning's motion. So when he says everything before us, does he mean all of the village agencies, or is he also referring to every single grant and everything on every single piece of paper that's before me on my desk? Well, he can't know all the papers that are on my desk, but we have received a lot of information recently about this. So I want to be clear about what that means. So secondly, I support the intent of us moving forward with second reading, since we're in this position and there doesn't appear to be much that we can do, as long as we acknowledge that there's a time when we'll have to come back and change this. But I don't have any reason to believe, and Mr. Hayes can correct me, that if we're doing third reading next week, we will actually have updated numbers. And so if we are making this determination based on having information next Thursday, I guess I want to confirm that we're actually going to have that information, because if we're not, we're going to find ourselves back in this situation again. So one, I want to clarify the intent of the motion. Is he asking that we approve all of the millage agencies and then address the other items separately? And then secondly, wanted to confirm, will we actually have updated information next week, or will we be in the same position? Thank you.
Mr. Chair, a question, a follow-up, you can stay on your line.
Ms. Malinowski was next.
Okay, I can wait.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be quick. Just clarification on my last statement there. In addition to the two Midlands Tech budgets not being 10% under, Columbia Area Mental Health also did not reach the 10% threshold. And for the record, the approximate total amount of fund balances for all the millage agencies is almost $145 million. Thank you.
Let me ask for clarification from Mr. Hayes. Mr. Hayes, those two agencies that Malinowski referred to that did not submit a request of 10%, did they submit anything?
No, right. Yes, the Midlands Tech did not submit anything. They submitted a document, a response document, which is in the companion document, which explained their rationale. The Columbia Area Mental Health budget is so low. I mean, the difference between their original amount, which was $2,311,000, and the $2,096,000, it's about it's $115,000. It's about a 5% decrease. So it's not a 10% decline, sir. But it was smaller. It's not 10%. It was 5%.
I would like to give them 10% more.
And what did you say about the other one?
Midlands Tech did not submit a budget request, but they did submit a response document that we placed in the companion document. And I was told by their staff that the response document explained to council their rationale for not submitting their request.
All right, thank you. What's Mr. Manning's motion? Mr. Manning, just for clarification.
Mr. Chair, I think I had a question.
I'm getting your question. I'm just trying to remind everybody what
Okay, thank you.
Just wanted to remind you what was before us. Mr. Manning's motion was seconded by Ms. Malinowski regarding approval for everything before us for second reading. Ms. Myers.
So I was going to say exactly what Mr. Manning said about the fund balances, literally close to $100 million in a time where we're all experiencing a pandemic. And in harmony with what Ms. Newton was saying, to the extent that we're going to look at this next week, Thursday, my concern would be that given that the budget office has said that they're not really clear on what people mean when they submit their fund balance, what those numbers in the fund balances mean, and we will be reading a final budget next week. I'm not certain that that will be enough time, given the volume of paper that we have on these numbers, unless there is a date certain by which whatever information they're giving us has to be received by us in a final form so that we can actually evaluate it meaningfully. Because, you know, a drip feed on Tuesday or Wednesday night, when there are literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages of numbers to be digested, is a little, for me, problematic, given the pandemic and where we are. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Ms. Myers, I must be sounding more and more like Mr. Manning because I was the one that mentioned that figure.
I'm sorry, Mr. Malinowski. I'd like to give you complete credit. Certainly not to take it from you. So I guess, Mr. Chair, can I ask a question? And you don't sound like it at all.
Go ahead. You said floor. Go ahead.
So I would like to ask our staff what their projected deadline is for getting stuff to us so that we can evaluate everything. And will that include some requests to the millage agencies to explain what they mean when they say fund balances?
Ms. Myers, well, just to go back to your fund balance question. So if I'm understanding, so you would like the millage agencies to because they provided their fund balances, overall amounts. Some of them had them broken down into category. What you would like to do is for each village agency to submit their each category of their, like be it reserved or unreserved or individual, each fund balance to be placed in a category. Is that what you're asking?
Yes, sir. I'm going on your comments earlier that you weren't really clear on what they meant by fund balance. And so we'd have to get greater clarity from the individual millage agencies. And given that I've looked at what they have, I was made a little bit unsure by your comments, and I want to be clear on what we're looking at if we're asking everybody to dig deep.
Yeah. What I was saying earlier, we listed the fund balance amounts that were submitted by each organization. And I put on it, I had my staff place in the note that this was their fund balance in total. So it may not have been their total unreserved fund balance, So that's why I put the caveat in it. I said I didn't feel comfortable speaking about the details of it, of what each one of the entities' fund balance amounts were, but there were individuals on the line who could address that, but I couldn't address it as I'm not privy to their information. So I just had their total fund balance, but I couldn't tell you how much it was reserved versus unreserved.
Oh, and thank you so much, Mr. Hayes. I appreciate that and understand it. I'm saying that to make a decision on it, we do need to know that information because if it's a reserved fund balance, there's no way it's different from an unreserved fund balance. And so having that information is critical to a decision. Thank you.
Well, unreserved amounts will allow you to have the ability, the flexibility to use it. But if those funds have been reserved already for something else, then obviously those entities would not have the ability to use that as a cushion.
I'm agreeing with you, Mr. Hayes. I'm just saying that your document doesn't tell us in all cases which is which. And you said that you would rather them tell us, and that I'm agreeing with you, sir.
Right.
Thanks, man.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
You're recognized for a point of order, Ms. Newton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have been appreciating this discussion, and I guess I just wanted to back up to the two questions that I asked, one of which was clarifying the motion that is before us, and then the second was inquiring as to when we were going to get the updated numbers and if we were going to have them by next Thursday when we're currently scheduled to have third reading. And then after that, I'm going to raise my hand again and get in line behind everybody else.
Mr. Chair, may I answer the question?
Yes.
No, these numbers that we've gotten from the county auditor, we're not. He told me they're not there not to be any adjustments until sometime in the fall. So there will be no additional information between now and third read.
Thank you, Mr. Hayes. And then my question would remain for Mr. Manning regarding the intent of his motion and what the everything includes here.
Mr. Manning, you want to respond to that question?
Yes, sir. I'll be glad to. The intent of my motion to everything would include everything from the first thing to the last thing in a procedural way that, I don't know why we're going through this tonight and then go through it all again in a week from now if it's procedural. But anyway, everything I meant the thing from the first thing to the last thing.
So all of the grants, all of the millage agencies, all of those, everything that was on our agenda for tonight?
Yes, millage agency grants, general fund, special revenues, debt service, enterprise,
We need to correct.
Mr. Chair, clarification, would that be items 1 through 78 as we were provided?
That's what I'm assuming from Mr. Manning's motion, yes.
Thank you.
I have Mr. McBride and Ms. Newton.
I think I forgot to take my hand down, but I'm going to reiterate the need to look at that unreserved fund balance, because I think that could definitely impact my decisions in terms of going with the budgets. Thank you.
Ms. Newton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And a different question, but related, directed at our attorneys. As we look at these Richland County funds, obviously, our millage agencies, and we're obligated to do so. Mr. Farah, I am wondering if there is any guidance as it relates to fund balances, whether those are items that we can even consider as we are making our funding recommendations. And if so, if there's any guidance around that to ensure that we are fulfilling our statutory requirements.
Well, so for example, you know, are you talking about agencies like, for example, that might be funded through H taxes?
No, I'm specifically referring to our millage agencies. We're having a conversation and there's a lot of concern that's being expressed around fund balances.
Right.
And so what my inquiry is if that is a line of inquiry that we are allowed to consider in our budget, and if so, if there are any particular parameters regarding how we are instructed to make those decisions, because there's a lot of concern around that here, and I just want to make sure that we're fulfilling what our statutory obligation is and going about this the right way.
Right. So, okay. So, for example, under state law 49140, you know, it says in the preparation of annual budgets or supplemental appropriations, council may require such reports, and it says estimates and statistics from any county agency or department as may be necessary to perform its duties as a responsible fiscal body. So by extension, you know, you've got a county agency or a department. If you've got these other entities that you have some obligation to fund, but it may not be a certain amount, you certainly can reach out and ask for that so you can make appropriate, you know, because it clearly says estimates. So I mean, you're gonna need that type of information to make a reasonable estimate, and you absolutely can ask for it. Now, if they don't respond or can't do it timely or whatever, that may be a bridge you have to cross later, but you certainly can ask for that information.
Okay, any further questions on the motion before us? For information, clarification, or whatever. Now, let me just for clarification, before us passes, and this is for you, Mr. Hayes, and therefore we would have a third reading on next Thursday. I think it's very important for us, for me, is to know what's going to be the difference. And in other words, what information we're going to have then that we don't have now, so we can move forward with decisions. And no need to put it if we're not going to have any specific information to help us move forward. I think some of my colleagues have maybe one thing might be helpful, at least for the village agencies. I think we look at some of the administrative funding for the various village agencies, but I like to ask myself, I mean, other colleagues too, what is it that we need that we don't have for next Thursday if we did not take action tonight?
Well, Mr. Chair, from the staff's perspective, there won't be any additional information that comes from Richland County, but we can reach out to those millage agencies who have not provided me a breakdown of their fund balances to make sure that we get a breakdown of everyone's fund balance so that council can have that information.
And I'm asking my colleagues, because we're talking about other, the motion includes grants and general fund and special revenue and debt service, those other items too. You know, I need to know if there any additional information we're going to need prior to Thursday if we punt until Thursday. I'm sorry, Ms. Newton, you recognize.
Mr. Chair, I'd make a substitute motion that with the stipulations that we discussed previously, that we approve the millage agencies for second reading and then continue with the discussion of the other items on our agenda.
So the motion is to approve the millage agencies as presented and then move, then we can move the agenda, yes. So that is your motion?
Yes, but with the stipulations that we've discussed before, understanding that we may have to come back at some point and adjust those numbers, et cetera.
Okay, is there a second for the substitute motion? I'll second it, and if there's no other second. So we'll discuss the substitute motion before us now. Any discussion reference to substitute motion? There being no discussion reference to substitute motion, then I'll ask
wait, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Sorry. Yeah, if I could, I understand the situation that we're in, and I don't disagree with my colleagues in terms of the questions around why we're doing this, but there's some other items that I have questions about regarding grants and other areas that we would not have the opportunity to discuss as a body if we approved everything all at once. That said, I can certainly take my questions offline if that's not the will of the body.
Okay. Again, the West report, the substitute motion reference to millage agencies. Any further discussion reference to the substitute motion? Mr. Malinak, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Newton, they would have the opportunity to be discussed either between now and third reading, as you said, offline, or at third reading, they can still be discussed. That's all. Thank you.
Mr. Malinak, you referring to what when you say they? What are you referring to?
I'm referring to Ms. Newton said she had some questions on some of the other items on the motions list. And she said that there would not be opportunity to discuss them if we approved the motion before us now. But there would be time, because you can either get questions answered, as she stated, offline in between this reading and the third reading, or you can bring it up at the third reading. So there is time. Thank you.
Ms. Tracy, are you recognized?
Yes, thank you. So at our budget public hearing, we had a small number of people who were there to speak up for their organizations. I believe we have some folks here. Have we carved out any time tonight, or do we plan on having, I believe I sent an email earlier to say, would there be time either in this reading or another time for folks to speak up and advocate for their organization?
According to our rules, that can happen, but that would require a vote of council for that to happen.
Thank you. I know we have a motion before us, so I guess to be in order, we would have to vote for that motion and then make a motion.
And we're dealing with yes, and that's not as germane to the budget items that we're covering now, though, on our agenda.
Okay, thank you.
Any further discussion? Again, what's proposed now is a substitute motion, and that is to move forward with the millage agencies as presented.
I think that's correct. Miss Newton needs to restate her motion for clarification.
Ms. Newton, can you restate your motion for clarification?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. My motion was that we approve for second reading the millage agencies as presented, with the caveat and understanding that we recognize we may need to come back and adjust these numbers, and then that we proceed with the other items on our agenda.
And that has been seconded?
That has been seconded.
Okay.
Okay, if no further discussion, Ms. Roberts, can you call the roll for the substitute motion?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair. And for clarification, this is actually the second substitute motion. Just for the record. Malinowski,
No.
Dickerson,
Yes.
McBride,
No.
Livingston,
Yes.
Teratio,
Yes.
Walker, Kennedy, Manning,
No.
Jackson,
No.
Myers,
No.
Newton,
Yes.
it fails.
And that brings us back to Ms. Robert, you said there was a second substitute motion and an original motion. What do you have down as a second substitute motion? I mean, the first substitute motion.
Mr. Manning's motion to approve the document as a whole.
And what was the original?
Mr. Jackson made a motion to approve the.
Declaration.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. So what's before us now is Mr. Manning's motion to approve everything from that's on our agenda tonight for second reading. Mr. Racer, is your hand still up to speak?
Yes, actually, I would like to be recognized. I understand that in this document, and of course, lots of my colleagues have brought up that there are issues with approving these numbers based on the uncertainty ahead of us. I would also like to state that just a sort of a 10% cut across the board, while it is equal, it is not equitable based on the services that so many of these organizations provide. So there may be some organizations that are not active very much at all right now. And there are some organizations that have been showing up and providing services the whole time that that COVID-19 has been affecting us. So I just wanted to put that out there, that my position is not to just approve a 10% cut across the board simply because it is equal. I would rather advocate for something that looks more like equity in terms of services provided. And I know that that's a difficult position to be in, but I feel that that is just the right thing to do.
Thank you. Any further discussion regarding the?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair. And if this is the substitute motion, first of all, I know exactly what I'm getting ready to vote on, because we've got a lot of information has been provided, and I'm not exactly sure where I am and what I'm getting ready to vote on. I mean,
You're getting ready to vote on the items before you for second reading. All of the items before you for second reading is the motion.
and for the millage agency, voting on the millage agency.
This motion includes millage agency, grants, and all the general fund, all the ones before you, debt service, prize fund, capital improvement, and so forth.
Oh, okay. Oh, no.
Just for second reading.
This is second reading, yes. Any further discussion regarding the motion before you? If not, I'm asked, Mr. Ross call the roll.
Malinowski.
Yes.
Mr. Chair?
For clarification, Mr. Hayes.
Yeah. I want to point out that I heard the general fund repeated numerous times. Remember, the general fund itself is not on this track. It won't be taken up according to council's approval until the fall. So the general fund numbers are not included in this particular.
Okay, you heard that, Mr. Manning. But you heard the rationale for that, Mr. Manning, because you made the motion.
My motion was everything from the beginning of the agenda to the end of the agenda. If it's in the agenda, then it's my motion of everything. If it's not in the agenda, then it's whatever it is, but it has nothing to do with what I have for an agenda tonight and my motion.
Mr. Hayes, was it on your agenda tonight to approve for us to approve general fund?
Right. The general fund as a whole is not on the agenda. Only the grant portion of the general fund, but not the general.
So that's what's before us then. All right, thank you. Any further discussion? If not, Ms. Ross, can you call the roll for that substitute motion that was made by Mr. Manning?
Malinowski.
Yes.
Dickerson.
No.
McBride.
Yes.
Livingston.
Yes.
Terratio.
Yes.
Walker. Kennedy. Manning.
Yes.
Jackson.
Yes.
Myers. Newton.
No.
Myers is a no.
It passes.
Thank you. That motion passes. That items that are before us tonight for second reading. Mr. Hayes, I'm turning back over to you. See if there's anything else from.
Well, if I'm understanding the motion correctly, you all everything that was on the agenda, you including the ordinance itself, you all passed it for second.
That's correct.
I move to adjourn.
Second.
Just quick, I accept that, Mr. Hayes, then you're clear on terms of us being through with what's on our agenda for tonight.
Yes.
I'll accept the motion for adjournment. And was there a second?
Yes, sir, I did, Mr. Chair.
Accept the second for adjournment. Ms. Robinson call roll.
Malinowski,
Yes.
Dickerson,
Yes.
McBride,
Yes.
Livingston,
Yes.
Teratio,
Yes.
Walker, Kennedy, Manning, Jackson,
Yes.
Myers,
Yes.
Newton.
Yes.
It passes.
Motion passes. Let me thank everybody for their involved participation. The meeting's adjourned.